would like to introduce our first speaker. Chris Lewis is a leader in Indigenous-led developments of our region, now in his four-year term as a councillor of the Squamish First Nation. He was one of the founders of MST Development Corporation. MST stands for Musqueam, Squamish, TsleilWatulth, which is working on $1 billion of assets. He graduated from Simon Fraser University. Within 10 years, he was a member of the Board of Directors. Most significantly, his fellow board members elected him as their chair. So he served as the chair of SFU. He has just recently completed his 6-year position, and very wonderful tribute to him. The board has elected him chair emeritus. So he still has a role in SFU right now. So it's been a real pleasure speaking with Chris, as he's truly dedicated to bringing Indigenous values to his work and is active in seeking the wisdom of elders and advice from his community. He also has an interest in connecting with other Aboriginal people. For example, through the Olympics, he developed a special relationship with Maori people in New Zealand, and they do have cultural and economic development exchanges. And we hope through this urban lunch, we will gain more champions for Indigenous economic development. So please, I'm very pleased to welcome Chris Lewis. Chris, take it away.
Thank you very much, Sam, and really appreciate kind of being here. And thank you for the honor, for the invitation. And it's just an honor as well to be with my colleague, David Negrin, as well, who's our CEO of the MST DC Development Corporation, and super glad to be here and be asked. I do have a presentation. I know people like to see visuals, especially those that aren't from Vancouver. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go through a little bit of a deck. I really want to leave some time at the end for some great Q&A time, so that you can ask me kind of any question that you want in relation to kind of where we're going collectively as the 3 host nations of Vancouver, Musqueam, Squamish, and TsleilWatulth, or individually as Squamish. So I'll focus on one of Squamish's pioneer projects, the Senakw project, and I'll just share my screen at this point. Can everybody see that? I'll get a little bit of a thumbs up from Sam. Everybody? Super. I'm just going to ensure that I can see it as well. So as you can see, Senakw is on the south shore of False Creek within Vancouver. And as we've coined it, it's one of the most important projects in the history of Canada, not just British Columbia or Vancouver, with an opportunity for both city building and nation building for the Squamish Nation. And as you can see, this wonderful mock-up of what is proposed here, quite metaphorically and symbolic, where you have this gateway of proposed buildings facing the downtown center and the downtown core of Vancouver. Just a little summary of the Senakw project. As I mentioned, it's such a great opportunity. We call it our diamond in the rough. We're really striving in relations to demonstrating our values through reconciliation, responding to climate change, creating the housing we need to support future growth for the nation, but also for all of our neighbors in Metro Vancouver. We're going to strive for Indigenous excellence. As Sam mentioned, this is one of the largest Indigenous-led city building initiatives in Canadian history, and also one of the largest that Squamish Nation has ever done as well in terms of our economic independence. This is really going to showcase Squamish Coast Salish architectural and design to really let the world know that as Indigenous peoples, we are still here. It's also going to create hundreds of jobs for entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs outside of our community in relations to the construction, operations, and design of this building. We really strive to ensure that it's sustainable. It's going to be the largest net zero carbon housing development that we know in the world. There's a few others that we're kind of looking at in relations to how they're doing that. And really, we have an aspirations to be 100% greenhouse emission free in relation to the heating, cooling. So we're looking right now and working with the city in Metro Vancouver on a district energy system that would be powered by a massive sewer interceptor that goes through the site, which is managed by Metro Vancouver. So looking at harnessing energy from the energy below us that's moving through. Also, we're going to have 225,000 square feet of mass timber construction. So really generating 50% less embodied carbon than solely focusing on concrete. Really, this is about 6,000 homes coming to Vancouver in little as 5 years from start to finish. And it's ready. We just kind of completed service agreement negotiations with the city of Vancouver. So we should be hopefully getting going very soon this year, or if not early next year. As many of you may or may not know, this is reserve land with the Squamish Nation. So it's not subject to city like zoning or approvals process, hence why we can move so much quicker. What we have to do in relation to this under the Indigenous Services Canada process is our people need to designate the land, which we did a number of years ago in 2010, but we re-designated the land for another 120 years for economic development purposes, along with showing the business case scenarios to our people. And I'm really proud to announce to all of you that 87% of our people that voted in favor of the development and in relation to where we're going. And really, this is going to be primarily focused on purpose-built rental homes so that it could be affordable to all Vancouverites. Affordable, we're looking at 700 or more affordable homes. It's really about helping solve the housing crisis that we all know that exists within Metro Vancouver. A little bit of a project overview. It's 10.5 acres, roughly about 4 million square feet. As I said, there's 600 plus rental homes. In terms of how we're moving forward, I think if the market shifts, we'll look at some sort of kind of strata, but we'll deal with that as development continues to move and how the market will dictate us. As we know, it's one of our largest economic development projects in Canadian history. Because I'm well aware of our project in Jericho as well with our neighbors Musqueam and TsleilWatulth. That's 90 acres of development, and I would say that you know, we're both doing very well. Really, we're looking at historical, architectural, and cultural construction in relation. You can kind of see it looks vastly different than the buildings on the other side of False Creek. I'll just talk a little bit about the history of Kitsilano Ire number 6, or as we know it as Senakw, which means the inside village. And as you can see, we've lived here since the beginning of time. We have a long history here as Squamish Nation people. And in 1791, when our recent visitors came from European countries, there was a good relationship there. And then in the late 19th century, 1800s, there was a surveyed reserve. As you can see, in 1877, it was surveyed as a reserve. That does encompass what we now know as existing Vanier Park and many of the other properties as well there. If I can turn your attention, because I got a question earlier on around how did we get this land back? And you can see that there was 3.5 acres of railways expropriated very early on in the reserve creation, and then an additional 7 acres for railway in 1907. And then what happened in 1913 as a result of the McKenna-McBride Commission that basically stated that they wanted to fully expropriate like many reserves or cut them down for European settlement. The entirety of this reserve was expropriated, and there was a forced surrender to our people. And I want to say this because I am a direct descendant of the people that lived here. My great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather, along with their families, lived here. And so I had the pleasure of hearing from my great auntie, my grandfather's auntie. She remembers when she was a little girl, getting put on a barge and watching their houses get burnt as they were barged away over to the North Shore. So that's the history that we inherit in relations to that. We've been in legal struggles ever since in regards to the land. We settled an omnibus class action in 1999, where we were compensated about that. But as a result of that settlement, that 3.5 acres and the 7 acres that were taken away earlier returned back to the nation. So the railway land sometimes. So this is what we have left in relation to that, the 10.5 acres. As you can see through the presentation, originally this was 80 acres. So you can just imagine about the scaling and massing that we have right now. If we had that entirety of the 80 acres, what the nation could be possibly doing in relations to kind of development as it relates to Vancouver. A little bit of the master plan, you can kind of see like the phasing and how the phasing is going to start. Like you have a little over 1,100 units, hopefully starting this year or early next year. In relations to that, then we're going to move to phase 2, another just under 1,500 units, and then we continue to move throughout the phases. And because the nation is in the driver's seat and we are the jurisdiction of the land, we can control the timeline in terms of how these buildings come on board and how we're working with that. So as you can see, again, 6,000 units and 10.5 acres of land. What's super exciting about this, and I think I always love to say this is about nation building. We, for the last 150 years, have had to watch a city grow up in front of us on our homelands, on our territories, without having any meaningful participation. So to be in the driver's seat and to be a city builder once again, like we were prior to the arrival of European settlers, is super exciting. And as you can see, we're participating in the built environment. We're looking at over $100 million plus in new transit infrastructure and a historic First Nation streetcar partnership that would take away the reliance on the individual vehicle, hence, meeting the needs around climate change and doing our part around climate change. And then really having a partnership with the City of Vancouver, Metro Vancouver, and TransLink in relations to connecting the city and Granville Island to the streetcar and then ultimately to the Canada line, so that it becomes a network and people can move very freely through the site and move forward. As well, as we can all appreciate as planners and developers, the local schools are bursting at the seams. Henry Hudson is down the street and is at maximum capacity. So we're looking at innovative ways to talk with the school boards and our relative nations in relations to creating new schools, possibly in Vanier Park and in other areas, so that we can meet the need of our people that live in Senakw and that are going to come and live with us, including our own Squamish Nation people. And as I mentioned, this is really going to be extending Vancouver's low carbon district energy system. As you can see on the bottom right there, connecting all of that up to ensure that we're doing our part in relations to being sustainable. And then just a little bit of a wrap up. As you can see, it's one of the largest partnerships with any First Nations in Canadian history. Super exciting. We're looking at development over the next like 5 to 10 years rather than a traditional development of say 20 years. So we're kind of moving very quickly, and we're bringing on all partners. If the federal government wants to be involved, we're talking to people within Ottawa, we're talking to folks within Victoria, because we really also want to be seen as being a solution to city building and not an impediment to city building, so that we're doing things in a new and innovative way in relations to creating opportunity and also a home for our family. I hope that our families that are descendants from this village come and live and take pride in relations to what we're building. I definitely do as a descendant of this village. And then here's just a little picture of the 10 megawatt district energy plan in relations to how we do this. First large scale net zero carbon housing development, one of the few in the world, as I mentioned. Looking at the GAG and the cooling aspect, you can see right now in Vancouver, like we're going through multiple heat waves this summer. It's going to be a standard to ensure that not only that our buildings and our people are warm during the winter, but they're also cool during the summer. And we need to do that in a sustainable way and ensuring that we're harnessing the energy underneath us in relations to that. Just a little bit of the massing in relations to the Burrard Street Bridge in relation to how it will connect to the Burrard Street Bridge. And then just really how does Senakw solve the housing challenge is when you bring on 6,000 homes to the downtown center within 5 to 10 years. I know I say 5 years, but I'm giving myself a little bit of time and our people some little bit time. But when you're doing that, you're really, you know, putting the market in. We can look at all of the analysis, and the rental rates within Kitsilano and Vancouver are, you know, at a historic low, and the demand is absolutely there in relations to this. So really, it's just about creating space for our people, Indigenous people, providing some social housing, providing rental and purpose-built rental to ensure that, and really kind of taking our place in our city and really creating a creative economy in relations to that. So just a little bit of the analysis that we did around kind of housing for the creative economy. Like you can kind of see the Senakw development, you know, downtown you got Microsoft, Amazon, Sony, TELUS, Apple. In Yaletown you got all of those companies as well. We're looking at all of these neighbors and all of these neighborhoods in relations to that and who's there, and really looking to see, like, you know, creating a home because Vancouver is attracting investment, attracting companies because of our lifestyle and because of, you know, where we're situated in the world. So I think just as Vancouver is doing that, the Squamish Nation is doing that as well to ensure that we're providing and maximizing the opportunities as well in terms of all the visitors in our homelands. And um, to ensure that, and there's a teaching that we're taught as Indigenous peoples, is that we have a responsibility for all of our visitors in our homelands. Traditionally, if something happened to somebody when they were on our watch or in our homelands to another Indigenous person, it could be an act of war. It could lead to conflict. So we take that into heart in relations to being good neighbors and good hosts in relations to our traditional land and how we move forward. So this is kind of just talking about the network that's in and around us. And really, why does this matter? Over the last 10 years in our research, Vancouver has brought an average of 750 rental units to the market per year, resulting in a severely constrained housing supply. We all know that. Senakw really represents bringing 6,000 units online within the next 5 to 10 years, where 700 or more are going to be affordable. There's going to be spaces for our Squamish people to live as well. The equivalent of 12,000 units per year is super exciting. And by creating the housing need in the creative economy, attracts talent to the projects, it attracts people to the region. You're not going to get a better view from this area. There's like Vanier Park is in front, and you're gonna look out to the ocean, and it's super exciting. One of the rare gems, I would say, in Canada or anywhere in the world. And ultimately, this project stands to offer an inspiring solution for housing and a meaningful response to the climate crisis and a movement towards Indigenous reconciliations that demonstrates global leadership. And really, when I say that, it's really the Squamish Nation taking their rightful place in our homelands, showcasing what could be done in a much faster and sustainable way that meets the needs of not just the Squamish Nation, but all of our visitors and all of our people that are living in our land. So I just really want to thank you, Sam. I think I'll do a little bit of caveat just before I stop sharing my screen here, is that in the 1990s, and David's going to jump in and talk a little bit about Musqueam, Squamish, TsleilWatulth. In the 1990s, the three host nations were fighting over this land of Senakw and fighting over this aspect. We weren't in a collaborative process. So when we start moving towards the 2010 Winter Olympics and saying we're stronger together, we shouldn't be fighting each other over the little land that is left, we should be working together. It really starts and spins off into some of the massive projects that we have in relations to the Jericho lands, as I mentioned, 90 acres. And, we're now looking at, in relation to that partnership, rather than fighting one another, we're looking at over $2 billion of real estate asset as well, which has collectively made the host nations, Musqueam, Squamish, and TsleilWatulth, the largest real estate developer in the region. And super excited to be here today, and I look forward to the questions. I will stop my share here and just thank you for the time, and hopefully you enjoyed my presentation.
Thank you so much, Chris. That's I'm just thinking about your great-grandfather and your great-great-grandfather and how proud and astonished they would be on how you are taking this leadership and creating really a miracle. And as a renter in downtown Vancouver, I'm so grateful that there is at least one government in this region that is taking the housing crisis seriously. We've got a lot of demand on our rental, and it's a serious problem, and you are doing something about it. So thank you for that. And Chris, please feel free to in the chat either a direct message to Sebastian or to everyone else. And Chris is really interested in engaging in the Q&A. So I'd like to now move to our next special guest. He is an icon of Vancouver development in this city and this region. David Negrin was one of the very first people that Victor Lee hired as the Concord Pacific. That was right at the very beginning when there was, it was basically rail yards, or actually expo land. And he was able to bring that whole process through to creating the miracle, really, that we have here in Concord lands in Yaletown. So then he went off to work with Aquilini Developments and did some amazing developments. So he has had a huge impact on this city. And then he was unanimously chosen by the three First Nations and to lead their effort. And I just wanted to reference Chris's comment about the Olympics. When I went off to Torino to fly this flag, I went off with three other wonderful gentlemen, and I know Gibby Jacobs was part of that. And it was great to see the First Nations, three host people really coming together and gelling, and it was a really unifying moment. And it was actually the Olympics that led to the relationship with other Aboriginal people around the world, especially New Zealand. So I'd like to ask David to please give a presentation. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Sam. And also thank you to Devin and Sebastian for inviting Chris and I here today. And to Chris was one of our founding members of the MSTDC board, and he was instrumental in leading our board and the Three Nations to the developments we have today. And I think it's important before we start, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of my career, and why I'm saying that is it'll show the significance of the company that I work for now. When I began, as Sam said, I started with Victor Lee and began working on a project, Concord Pacific, which was about, when I left, was about 9 million square feet. And I think today they're almost up to 11 million square feet through consistent rezonings, which was probably one of the largest projects in North America at the time. And then I moved on to Aquilini. With Aquilini, we made a conscious effort to work with First Nations. I believed, as I was president of the UDI at the time, I stated that within 5 years that the three nations, MS and T, would be the largest developers, if not in Canada and North America, and that is true today. And we did a number of projects. An example being, we worked with the TsleilWatulth First Nation, and that was probably one of the first projects, large projects that I worked on. When we came on board, our first housing project, single-family housing projects, sold for $550,000 for about a 2,500 square foot house. Today, that is reserve land. Those homes are selling over 1.8 million. The second large project I did was with the TsleilWatulth First Nation. And we started out selling townhomes there, and those townhomes started out at 450,000. Today, those townhomes are over 1.1 million. And the reason I mention this is it's important to note that people were hesitant when we first started to buy on First Nations lands, because most of those lands were either reserve or based on a 99-year lease. People will say that a lease has an impact of about 15% of a discount when you buy. I can tell you in the last 5 years, I've not seen that discount. I've seen maybe a 5% discount. That shows the quality of the work that First Nations are doing and the developments that they're bringing to market, and that the public has seen that these are very, very good investments to move into. In terms of the internal governance, I report to a board, and it's made up of 2 members to each nation. And I had a mandate when I first started, and the mandate was very simply and very firm. David, we're nations. We're getting back our land that we've been fighting for hundreds of years. We don't have the financial capacity to put it in, so please go out and find developers that will come in, and by coming in, there'll be no financial risk to the nation. As little cash required as possible. So therefore, what we've been able to achieve is that developers we're working with right now put up all the cash and all the guarantees, and the nations put in the land as part of that contribution, which is a huge contribution. The most important mandate I had from the board was never give up our land. We fought and fought to acquire it, and we don't want to sell it. Therefore, all our projects will be a 99-year lease. And as I stated earlier, I see as little as a 5% discount when we're selling those properties. Ensure First Nations people are offered good opportunities for employment and education. That was extremely, probably one of the second most important message, if not the first from the nations, is we want to be involved. We're looking at apprenticeships, we're looking at education, and we're looking at jobs. And lastly, ensure we become self-sufficient in the future. And when I was first brought on, I said that's probably a 7 to 10 years that you'll be able to get self-sufficient. I can tell you within 3 years, we are now a project I'll show you today in West Vancouver that is solely run by the First Nations with no partnership. So we've moved forward fairly quickly on that. Once the board approves the deal is presented to chief and councils. One thing you learn very quickly in working with First Nations, chief and councils do move on. You have to get to the membership. If you don't get to the membership, once a chief and council moves on, you may not have the power you thought, or the tools you thought you had, or the people you thought you had to complete this development. So it was very important to ensure that any development we have is approved by membership. And it's presented to membership for membership vote. As Chris's presentation showed, he had, I think, close to 80% membership approval for Senakw. You have to get that from the nation's memberships. As I said, chiefs and councils change, memberships do not. That's a very important lesson when working with First Nations. Once approved by the board, it goes to chair and council, or chief and council, it gets its approval. And I can tell you, we do our developments no differently than I've done developments in the past 30 years. The nations are one of the best clients I've had. I've worked for 4 billionaires in my life. I worked for the Lee family. I worked for the Hui family. I worked for the Aquilini family, and now I work for the Nations family. I can tell you that the Nations family is as powerful, as business-minded as any of the previous companies I worked for. Well, when we started out, people didn't know this, on the federal lands, it was a 50-50 partnership between Canada Land Corporation and the three nations, MS and T. I was mandated to go out and buy the property back from Canada Land Corporation. Therefore, the projects we own today with the federal government, Fairmont and Jericho, will be 100% owned by the First Nations. And that's very important because the original deal was the nations controlled 50%, Canada Land Corporation controlled 50%. Canada Land Corporation was and still is the lead, and have done a fantastic job in terms of the rezoning. But once the rezoning was completed, Canada Lands could sell off that parcel of land at market value. We felt that was difficult because it would put extreme pressure on us, that we would now be in competition of our sites. Therefore, we have completed a deal with Canada Land Corporation that will be 100% owners. We went out, once the project started, I went out to 13 developers in the city of Vancouver, all major developers. I can tell you out of those 13 developers, only 3 took it seriously. And the reason for that was they were didn't have the experience or didn't have the confidence of working with First Nations. Out of those 3 developers, one developer met what we called the 5 gateway conditions that I just described to you, which was no financial risk, no guarantees, we keep the land, education for the people, right? That was really important, and we become self-sufficient. They were the only developer that agreed to that mandate in terms of the RFP. That was Aquilini. Because I worked with Aquilini, everybody looked at me and they thought, are you the Trojan horse coming into the First Nation, giving it to the nations and then go back to Aquilini? I can tell you that was well on my mind. And the way I handled that is I went into my board and I said, no, I have no vote. Ernst & Young controls the RFP. Each nation's lawyers involved in the RFP, and my lawyers involved in the RFP. Thinking I was pretty smart doing that, I can tell you having 5 lawyers in a room has been extremely difficult, but it did one thing. It showed that the RFP was fair and just. And Ernst & Young has been a big proponent in leading the way through. In the deal right now for Fairmont and Jericho, Aquilini has not signed on yet. We're in the final throes of our negotiations, but we are very confident these will end fairly quickly. And Aquilini will own 25% and the nations will own 25% each. And Aquilini will be the GP, but I've always said to my nations, you as 3 hold the power for this development. And we're confident that the nations will always hold the power because they're 75% owner and Aquilini's are 25%. As I said, the partner is the GP. This partner ensures procurement and jobs for First Nation. It's extremely important that we get to the nation, that the nations in years to come will own 100% of their developments, and they'll be their own developer and they will be successful. Make no mistake, without me there, they'll be very successful. As I said to everybody, I'm a babysitter right now. I call myself Babysitting 101. I work with 3 nations. Our mandate is to keep the politics out of the business, but I have a very strong board that directs me and understands development. So I'm very comfortable that probably within the next 5 years, my role will disappear. And I think that's, and I say that because it's extremely positive. That's how quickly we move forward. Therefore, you know, the partnership is controlled by the nations. The nations get their land back. The nations participate in all major decisions. And to me, that's an excellent partnership. So what I'd like to do right now is move on and show you the projects in this extremely exciting time of First Nations. So the first slide is the MST Development Corporation summary. If you can just go one up, please. No, the other way. Yeah, perfect. And so what there is, you all know, I've stated that the 3 nations are full co-owners of 6 prime properties in Metro Vancouver. These properties total more than 160 acres of prime development. And the MST business plans seeks to add to this portfolio. I can tell you right now that we're in negotiations with both the provincial government and the federal government for another 8 million square feet, added on to about the 17 million square feet we have right now. There'll be a total, within a year to a year and a half, there'll be over 25 million square feet of developable lands for the First Nations in Vancouver. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the sites that we have in Vancouver right now. I call it the golden 10 miles. We have Jericho West, the Green Star, that's 38 acres. We have Jericho East, 52 acres. We have the Heatherlands at 37th and Heather, just off of Cambie Street, of 21 acres. We have West Vancouver of 5 acres. We have a liquor distribution branch, that's 10 acres. And we have Willington and Burnaby, that's 40 acres. You can see they're very strategic sites. They're great locations in Vancouver. And again, these add up to approximately, these sites alone add up to about 17 million square feet. Next slide, please. So the Jericho site, which is very comparable to the site that the Squamish Nation has. It really is one of the gems in Vancouver. And there's 2 portions of this site. You'll see Jericho West. We purchased that site off the federal government. And Jericho East, Jericho East, we purchased off the federal government. Jericho West, we purchased off the provincial government and put these 2 sites together. It's a CD1 zone site. We think we're going to end up with about a 3 FSR. We're currently in the policy statement. And this is really important to note, which Chris touched on. The developments my clients have instructed me to ensure that there is social housing. On these 2 sites alone, there'll be over 3.5 million, probably about 4 million square feet of social housing, attainable housing, and very important for everybody to know here, Indigenous housing. And the Indigenous housing is for First Nations people. This puts a huge dent in the social housing, call it attainable rental, that we've had in Vancouver for a long time. And again, my clients have instructed me that they want to be a solution to the problem. They don't want to be the problem, they want to be the solution to the problem. And when I meet in front of governments, both federally and provincially, I remind them of what the nations are bringing to Vancouver. And it's just not market housing. It's a culture, it's a way, it's a history, and it's called, and also addition to that is affordable housing and rental housing. So our potential gross right here, we believe we're going to get is 12 million square feet on this site of development. Next slide, please. And again, people always say, well, you're not just developing high rises. Well, we are developing high rises. Every developer in Vancouver does it. But what we've ensured, this map's small, I know, but there's green connections and pathways through this whole site. The other instruction from my nations is, David, when you design these, make them for everybody. They're not just for the people that live on this site. We want parks. We're going to keep the school, Point Grey School. We're going to have community centers. We're going to have a Nations Cultural Center. We're going to expand the creeks that go through the site right now. We're going to bring them back, which were salmon enhanced creeks, and people didn't even realize that. I didn't even realize it when we first took over the site. The other thing that's going to happen here is the SkyTrain. We had a mayor's council meeting 2 weeks ago, and I can tell you that there was full support to put the SkyTrain through this site, which is really important for the development of ancillary uses like retail, commercial, light industrial, and make it a community. So that's really, really important. Next slide, please. Again, this is an important slide. It looks heavy, and it is heavy. This is where we're starting first. The nations are no different than any other developer I've worked with or developers working in Vancouver. This is about density. This is about livability. This is about sustainability. This is about encouragement of inclusion of neighborhoods, not just a neighborhood within itself. And this is about First Nations being successful developers in the city of Vancouver. So you can see these are initial plans, but these have all been through the city. I should say plans and elevations and what I call draft development sketches. This will be a high density site. Make no mistake about it. We're not apologetic for it, but I can guarantee you this, it will be one of the best developed sites in Vancouver, and it'll have many cultural designs, elements to the Jericho lands. Next slide, please. Again, this is just looking basically from the west and the inclusion. And I can tell you, we've had a number of public meetings, and it's been really interesting. We thought we were going to battle with the public. The public's been very encouraging because 10th Street, if you ever go up 10th Street, many of the businesses have closed, and the retail community there, and even the neighbors have said, we want to grow this neighborhood. And again, I bring back to the major message was, look, we want inclusion here. We don't want to be shut off. We want to be included. We want to bring more people, more livability to this site. Next slide. So the Heatherlands, this is 37th and Heather. This site is well on its way. We have now submitted our rezoning. It's 21.4 acres at CD1 zone. The FSR right now is about 2.80. Again, you'll see there 450,000 square feet of social housing, 386,000 of rental housing, 1.5 million of market, and then the rest is retail. There's a cultural, a Nations Cultural Center here, large park, retail. Again, we're inclusive, and we feel that this site's going to address many of the problems that the City of Vancouver has. Next slide, please. Again, just a few sketches. You'll see a lot of green space and connection throughout the neighborhood. That's extremely important to the First Nation, and there'll be many cultural elements in terms of Nations artists. Again, the Nations Cultural Center. Next slide, please. Just a view here. You'll see these are sketches, but they're symbolic of Nations art. Again, walkways throughout the whole site. Next slide, please. And again, just a couple more visions of that. We'll just go through the next one. I'm watching the time here, so I'm going to move fairly quickly. And this just gives you some ideas of what we're doing and how we're going forward. Okay, and you can move on. So this is the Marine Drive. This is an extremely important development to us. It's a smaller development, as you can see. We're very proud of this one because this is now being run by the First Nations. It is fully owned, 100% owned by the First Nations, and the MSTD is taking this through. It's over 100,000 square feet of market housing, but also 100,000 square feet of attainable housing. We've talked to West Vancouver. The market today is in West Van is about anywhere from 1,050 a square foot to 1,100 a square foot. Our attainable housing will be sold for $800 a square foot. Why can we do that? Because our land costs are low. Quite frankly, I believe the nation shouldn't have to pay to get their land back, but I can tell you that our land costs are 70% lower than most other developers in Vancouver, and it allows the nations to do this type of development, and they're taking the responsibility to do this type of development because they know they have an advantage to do it. Next slide, please. You can see this, it's low rise, it's 3-story, larger units. Really, I would like here 80% family units. There's a large shortage of that in Vancouver, and also attainable. So if you bought a 1,000 square foot unit, a 3-bedroom, it's going to be around 800, 850,000. That seems like a lot, but I can tell you in West Van, you don't even get out the door for less than probably 1.5 million. So we're working very closely with the city of the district of West Vancouver. I can tell you that Mr. Chris Lewis has his work cut out with him, with the mayor and council. Everywhere we go is not always a pretty picture, and we're going to have some really battles here to get this through. But I can tell you with the nations, this project will come to fruition. Next slide, please. Again, just shows it from Upper Marine Drive. And then the next one I'm going to move quickly is a liquor distribution branch right now, and that is owned by the 3 Nations. Again, we're just in with the City of Vancouver, who we have an excellent relationship with. This zoning will move very quickly. I think this zoning will be completed by 2022, and that's unheard of, a 1.5 years for zoning. I can tell you that Teresa O'Donnell and her staff have been fantastic. They recognize the importance of the First Nations. They recognize the nations as government. They recognize the nations as through accommodation and reconciliation. And therefore, you'll see a project here that comes to fruition very quick. And this project here has 750,000 of attainable housing and 2.12 million square feet of total density. It will include industrial, it will include retail, rental, and market housing. Next slide. And it's just a view. There's 2 schemes here. This is the first scheme that was pretty much thrown out the door. They felt it was too high. The next scheme, please. This is where we are today, and we'll be coming through with our zoning. And again, a lot of that includes CLT construction, which is wood construction for all the low rise, and also the high rise included. And the last site I want to show you really quickly is the Wellington site in Burnaby. This site here is 40 acres. We will have one of the largest movie studios in Vancouver. We just completed a deal with a group out of LA. It will also include 750,000 square feet of attainable housing and social housing, and 4.5 million square feet of total density. This project has been submitted. It's just being submitted for its rezoning with the city of Burnaby, who again have been excellent to work with and recognize the nations as a government. Next slide, please. And we'll just leave it at this slide because I know I want to leave this for questions. You can see it's a high density site. The studios are just at the lower part of the screen. There'll be over 1.5 million square feet of studios, along with retail. There'll also be doctors' offices. We've worked with Burnaby. They need doctors' offices badly. They're expanding their hospitals, and then low rise and high rise. So again, my message to you today is that the nations are here to stay. And I also want to say that socially responsible in the developments they're doing. We could have done really what we wanted on these lands. It could have all gone back to reserve, and that's not the mandate I have. The mandate I have is, David, make sure that this is a project that addresses the needs of our nation and addresses the needs of the city of Vancouver, the city of Burnaby, and the city of West Vancouver. So again, Sam, to you and your group, thank you very much, and look forward to any questions.
Thank you, David. That is extremely exciting. And I'm now going to create a real problem for Sebastian. You've got 9 minutes to facilitate and try to summarize some of the questions and get them on to Chris and David.
All right, thank you, Sam, and thank you, Chris and David. I've done my best to combine as many questions as possible here. This really feels like a promising new frontier that can benefit everyone who can participate in cities. So no surprise to see lots of interest. And of course, I think we're all grateful for the leadership of the MST nations and really pushing this forward. So Dan Watson and James Plants have a question about what was your approach to coordinating with the city and provincial governments about transportation improvements, infrastructure improvements, park space, things like that?
Chris, you start and I'll jump in.
Yeah. So I'll just, in relations to the Senakw project, as I mentioned, the nation's really in the driver's seat around height and density and all of that. But Metro Vancouver, along with the city of Vancouver, really kind of, I guess, play a role in relations to service agreements. So there was a big conversation with the nation and the city, along with Metro Vancouver, in relation to providing services for Senakw, and also ensuring that it links up into their existing infrastructure and that we're meeting the needs and all of that. So it was really a government to government kind of conversation around ensuring that we're helping the city out as well in relations to some of their concerns and desires and goals, as well as ensuring that the nation's building sustainably to ensure that from just some of the hard services like water and sewer, that we're being sustainable in that matter and not building too high and too dense, and ensuring that we're fitting into the city. So thank you.
Can I just add to that, as I stated a number of times, inclusion to those that live in the city of Vancouver and outside of the Vancouver to be able to use these sites was extremely important. An example being the federal government, UBC, and the city of Vancouver came to us on Jericho, and they knew that the nations brought political power to the table in order to get transit out to UBC. There's over 80,000 students that go to UBC in and out a day, staff, students, everybody, ancillary jobs. And therefore, the federal government came to us first. The provincial government was a little bit difficult, but they're now on board, and we do have funding now to take it through. So the nations played a huge role in getting that funding. That's what's really important to governments, is they recognize, I call it the hammer that the nations bring to the table. They're probably, and not that others aren't looked at seriously, but when the nations come in, I can tell you, if I sit with 3 nations, if I sit with 3 chiefs or my board, my power in negotiating is 100% higher than it is if I'm by myself. The other thing is Infrastructure Canada has been extremely good. Infrastructure Canada is putting up the money through First Nations funding for these projects too. So the nations are not only bringing the land, they're also bringing funding here through the federal government, which is extremely important for transit to go through. Also with Senakw, I just say to everybody, we're also working with Infrastructure Canada to bring transit right through from First Avenue down through Granville Island, across Terry Huey's site, which is Molson's, and right into Chris's site. So it's not just for Chris's site either, it's for, again, Vancouver. So that's important.
Fantastic. Jordy Hungerford and Dan Watson have a question. They've observed the usual process for a developer figuring out what to build is to maximize what you can under the regulations. In Senakw, there weren't really these regulations, so either in terms of scale or in land use mix? How did you come to the process of figuring out what to build there?
It was really, like I mentioned in my previous answer, it was really what would work in relations to a service agreement and all of those other aspects that we can get in terms of the built environment. So I think that would be a #1 constraint in relations to sewer, water, connections, roads, networks, all of that. So we kind of looked at that. We also looked at the market in relations to kind of what the market could bear and all of that. And then we layered our culture and our spirituality and our way of being. The one thing about the nations, the Squamish, and I think my relatives from Musqueam, TsleilWatulth, like we've been here for a long time, thousands of years. We're going to be here. We're not going anywhere. So I think our development takes on like a 7-generation approach. It's just like, how do we kind of then develop in relations to ensuring that we're moving forward and all of those other aspects. So that's kind of like the limiting factors is kind of looking at all of that and really being good neighbors and ensuring that because I guess I'll just be frank, it's just like there's this fear that when First Nations become the developer that we're going to build a casino or we're going to build like a nuclear plant or something. Like it's to be a little bit like, and we really want to showcase to our neighbors, to our city, to the world, that we can be good developers and that we can be good neighbors and that we're going to develop something very quality that not only the nations will be proud of, but everyone will be proud of. Thank you.
We have time for one more, Sam?
Yeah, very brief. We got a 1 o'clock pretty hard stop, but go ahead.
All right, so Owen wants to know why the FSR for the Jericho lands is limited to 3. Was the city involved in that?
That's a very good question. We're not finished yet. We, as Chris said, we want to be responsible. We believe that it could take 3.5 to 4. But, also the nations wants to ensure that the grounds that are around it, because we are going to have a school, cultural centers, daycares, we want to make sure that there's good space. Make no mistake, with COVID, people don't want to live in a concrete jungle anymore. They don't. They want outdoor activity, outdoor space, outdoor amenities so that they don't have to go far. So that's all taken into consideration. At the end of the day, we're now between 2.8 and 3 is where we're today. I would hope we get to 3.5, but 3.5 may be too much. It may be, and I'm a developer, I usually like 7. But with what we're thinking there to make it a family-oriented development, that everything's there for you, 3 to 3.5 will probably turn out to be the right FSR.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you, everyone. This has been fantastic, very informative. Chris, we can't thank you enough for your leadership and for communication. I'd just like to say that we will be sending everybody a link to this. We edit it and then send it out, and we also will maybe conclude some other commentary from other questions if we're able to do that. I like to give the final word to Alain Bertaud from New York, who is here with us, and Marie Agnes as well. Please say final comments.
Oh, thank you very much for this presentation. For me, attending those lunches, it was a way of learning about Vancouver. That's, to my shame, I have never visited yet. And so that was really, for me, it was a double way of learning. First about the First Nation, the issue of First Nation, which I'm not very familiar with, although I worked a bit in New Zealand and Fiji on that, but I'm not really. And the second is, of course, that you, in terms of regulation, you have a blank slate. And I think the last 2 questions, the way you answered the last 2 questions was very important. Basically looking for demand, and saying, so the response is really demand. And I think that's your approach, and it should. Now, the constraint on demand is, of course, infrastructure. You link it, and I think you explained the trade-off between those 2, which are very important. So thank you very much again for my education on Vancouver. Thank you.
And thank you, Alain, for inspiring all of this. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, David. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sebastian and Devos. So will be next Urban Lunch 2 weeks from now. We will have Bruce Hayden, Oliver Hartleben, and one surprise. Welcome everyone to our third of 5 urban lunches in the lead up to the Alain Bertaud Public Salon. Alain Bertaud is one of the most influential urban planners in the world, especially since he published his book, Order Without Design. In it, he summarizes lessons he's learned as an urban planner working in cities around the world, including as chief urban planner for the World Bank. He started his career on Le Corbusier's designing of Chandigarh, capital of Punjab. Lynn and I fell in love with Alain and Marie-Agnès when we had lunch with them in New York last year. And what struck us was what a team they were. This was not the restless planner dragging his reluctant young family around the world. This was Marie-Agnès saying, let's explore the world, where she could get more on the ground data for her expertise in satellite imagery. They have raised their children in an astonishing number of exotic cities around the world, and each of these cities are different today because of their work. The major theme of Alain's book is how urban planners can benefit from the insights of urban economics. Alain observes that markets exert a powerful force in shaping cities. Our first urban lunch featured data visualization specialist Jens von Bergman, who was inspired by Alain's book to calculate the density gradient of Vancouver, which provides insights into our problems. He discovered that half of Vancouver's residential land has less population today than 1971. Our second urban lunch featured UBC SCARP faculty professor Julia Harton and Eric Villagomez, who provided insights into overcrowding and affordability. Both of them use Alain's work in their classes, and Alain wrote to Eric giving helpful comments, which you can read on Spacing Vancouver through the link in the chat. Julia was literally by a beach in Greece preparing for her wedding when she made her presentation. Such commitment. Today's urban lunch will feature the most significant development in urban planning paradigm of the last 50 years. The resurgence of Indigenous-led development and values where First Nations are taking agency and leadership. This is especially interesting to urbanists because they are harnessing market forces and challenging a paradigm that has led to urban sprawl and greenhouse gas emissions throughout the region and has driven up the price of housing. Before we get started, I would like to ask a member of our organizing committee, Planning Institute of BC South Coast leader, Devon Harlows, to describe her work supporting the initiative. And she's also the artist behind DeVille Design and her beautiful street maps, which are a must-have for hardcore urbanists. So Devon, do you want to speak?
Thanks, Sam. So as you mentioned, these 5 urban lunch series will be culminating in a final event with Alain Bertaud himself on September 20th at the Vancouver Playhouse Theatre. I or someone will share a link for tickets just in the chat here. Alain will be sharing his insights into city making, drawing from his book, Order Without Design, and he's going to be paying specific attention to the Vancouver context. So it's going to be super interesting for planners, architects, urban economists, city engineers, or anyone who's interested in city making here in Vancouver. For today's event, planners or members of the Planning Institute of BC will be eligible for 1 professional learning credit, as well as members who are part of the Architectural Institute of BC. And then for the final big event on September 20th, you'll be eligible for 1.5 credits. So a really good opportunity to hear from Alain himself in September.
Thank you, Devon, and you've been such a wonderful member of our committee. We have another member of the organizing committee, Sebastian Zane, who will coordinate the Q&A at the end. He works directly with urban planning ideas and Spanish. So we are going to have him speak a little later. I'd like to acknowledge board members Wayne Hartrick and Jeff Moore. And of all people, we have 2 special guests. They have attended every urban lunch. It's amazing. Alain Bertaud and Marie-Agnès are actually with us again. And thank you, both of you, for taking your time from New York or whatever part of the world you're in right now.